just a few months ago, he was an Oscar nominee for A Star Is Born. And years before that, Black Swan, an Oscar nominee for that. And you've also seen his work in Requiem for a Dream, Straight Outta Compton, Gothica, Iron Man, Noah. He's a very, very busy man, so we're glad that he could join us tonight for a few minutes. Before we talk Native Son, what was your Oscar experience like this year?
What was my Oscar?
Was it different than the other time? Did it feel
very
different?
similar to the first time, really. I mean, it's that show's about the celebrities. That show's about the people that that they really want to see on television. So you sort of just kick back and enjoy every moment, and just and it's a cliche, but you really are just happy to be there. And sometimes you run into heroes. I sat, Caleb Deschanel was behind me, so for me that's a highlight.
We had him here for our panel last fall, and he's definitely a legend and one of the leaders in your guild and in your industry.
No, absolutely, and he's a mentor, and he's a leading example for how to carry yourself as a DP.
The Native Son was on HBO a few months ago, and you worked with Rashid Johnson, who this was his first project directing in terms of like a feature film, and he's more of a conceptual artist. So what was that experience like working with him? Because he's very visual and he knows exactly what he wants creatively.
It was interesting because you would think that working with an artist, you're going to move into something that was very eclectic, and that's kind of my first impression when I was offered the film. And when I spoke to him on the phone the first time, we just had this connection over certain photographers, like Roy De Carava was a huge influence on the film in terms of, just as a jumping off point visually, like his photography, the tonality of what he did photographically was an example of what we wanted to achieve. And then as slowly as we started to prep the film, I realized that he actually just wanted to tell a story. And then finally he just told me, no, I just want this to make sense to the common person. I want people to understand what's being told, which took me by surprise because I was waiting for that idea. I was waiting for what's the big idea? We're going to do everything upside down. We're going to flash between different looks, and it was very straightforward. He didn't want to confuse it with his sort of artistic sensibilities. And then it was interesting for me because we as storytellers, so much of what we do has to be so literal, and what he does in his day job, so to speak, is it's non-literal. And it's completely, and as an artist, he said to me, it doesn't really matter if the person completely gets what you're trying to do. And that kind of blew me away. As filmmakers, if people don't understand what we're doing, then we're not achieving, right? And so it was a learning experience, but he really was. He wanted to flex a storytelling muscle.
Now that you've worked with him, is he somebody we're going to be seeing for years to come? Do you feel like he's got a lot of movies and television in him?
Well, 50-50 on that one. I think that he enjoyed it. He was very focused on the performances. Ashton Saunders, who plays Baker Thomas in the film, is an incredibly engaging person to watch. Not only in the film, but just watching him in the camera through the lens, or just watching him rehearse. And I think he really enjoyed that portion of it, the performance portion of it, which is, what directors typically enjoy about what they do. But he said something interesting to me at one point. He said, I don't really plan. Somebody asked him, what's your next film? I don't know. I don't really care if I make another one. And I'd never worked with any director that didn't care if he was making another film. I thought, what a great position to be in.
Make that decision later on. Speaking of Ashton, there's a shot that you have just not too deep in the movie, maybe 15, 20 minutes in, where he's completely still and all the action is sped up around him. Do you remember that shot? That's a really creative, amazing look to that. Can you talk about putting that together?
It was funny because we were shooting at the Opera House in Cleveland. We shot Cleveland for Chicago for rebate purposes, and so we actually shot the second version of that before we shot the portion that you're talking about, which is right in front of the Bean in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this amazing little area that we just got inspired by, which is one of the things that's great about working with an artist is like everything's possible. As long as there's materials around, something's possible to make. And we put him there, and I said, well, what if we tried this? And I had the Airy Mini, the Alexa Mini, and I wonder what the lowest. I didn't know. I was what the lowest frame rate was, and the camera's pretty user friendly. I'm pressing buttons, and it says 0.75 frames a second. And then you press on 0.75, and it says, beware, artifacts may occur, and it gives you a warning. And I say, okay. And then I saw this crazy thing happen on the monitors it was being fed into where, it didn't look like time-lapse that I was used to. I don't know, maybe it's the 0.75, what it was. And we did the math, and we had realized we had to run the shot for 20 minutes to be as long as we wanted it to be. And I hadn't done time-lapse in a long time. And that's how it was just born out of the moment.
Just trial and error, looking at it to see how it would look.
It was an idea. It wasn't even scripted, In fact, they wrote dialogue to go over it. It's one of the fortunate things about making a film that has voiceover is that sometimes you could step away from the coverage and the dialogue and you could do something a little more cinematic.
You use a lot of mirrors, reflections, window reflections and such, here and there in the movie. Why did you like that creatively?
You have to remind me when we used
Well, there were several shots, not necessarily just mirrors, but like looking at somebody through another, through a reflection or through, with a window reflection and so forth. And mirror. Well, there was a couple of mirror shots. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Again, that going back to the Roy de Carava reference, if you look at Roy de Carava, another photographer that we talked about was Saul Leiter. And if you look at a lot of their, both of their work, there's a lot of, they're street photographers, essentially. They're photojournalists, and they sort of hide in doorways. And a lot of photographs are like through two panes of glass. So when we're composing the film, it was, for me, so the whole mindset was that we would compose each shot like it was a still photograph. So if we found something that helped the composition, that's what we did. It wasn't a theme necessarily. It wasn't a character theme. It wasn't a narrative theme. It was just sort of, how do we compose this shot in the moment?
Something I've always wanted to ask a DP, and I'm going to ask you because you have these shots in this movie because of the plot, and that's how do you do a good car scene? You do good car scenes.
How do you do a good car scene?
Shooting from the interior, but so often I'll see a car scene and you can tell that the outside is, CGI or the lighting isn't good or, how do you do a good one? You do good ones.
Well, thank you. Okay. I guess.
And you have to because he's driving, his job is driving around.
He's a driver.
Yeah.
And we did no driving. I mean, ultimately, we did it all against green screen. We did any
you
scene
couldn't
that was
tell.
day. Well, any scene that was day, we were basically in a parking lot of a car wash, and we had put up blue screens outside. And then when we were interior, we just had a lot of, we used these lights that came out about 2 years ago, which are called Asteras. And they're tubes, basically LED tubes, that you can run without power. They're battery operated, and you put them on, and you could actually run a chase through them. So I've been using them since A Star Is Born, where I could just run them around the car and then create a chase, and just simulate the travel through an urban setting. And so that, I think that goes a long way into trying to create some kind of interactivity with what the eventual background's going to be. And then really just being really careful about what the plate is. If you're going to shoot the element, ideally you shoot the element. You go out in the streets and you find the right streets, you match the color. But if you don't and you're looking through, say, stock footage, which we had to do sometimes for Chicago, you have to pour over the footage and then find the material. If you really care about trying to create some fidelity out of the situation. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's hard, but you really have to take a meticulous eye towards it.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to do a quick set change here with extra chairs, and we'll do a full panel and just give us just a moment.